And we're live, joined by 247 recruiting editor Mike Roach. Clint's actually on the call. He's trying to fix some audio issues, but great to have you, Mike. How you doing tonight?
Good, fellas. Good to be back with you.
So let's talk about that busy month of June for you. I'm sure it's been like no recruiting season ever when you're talking about a group that didn't get a chance to visit as juniors, and now you got that senior class, that 22 class, 23 class, all come to campus at one time. How was that?
It was about as hectic of a month as I can remember. I mean, late in the month, my birthday was last weekend, so it was last Saturday, the 26th, and so my wife late in the month scheduled a trip to Vegas. Was just like, hey, we can do this off Miles, and I was like, do it because I need a break. I was in serious jeopardy of just getting burnt out on everything. It was. It's one thing that our job is we're always on every day, but, that particular day or that particular month, it was every hour of every day we had to be on and ready to go. And it got to be a lot. And I think it got to be a lot for the kids. I think it got to be a lot for the coaches, and everybody was kind of feeling that fatigue at the end of it. In fact, I ran into a couple of college coaches in Vegas who had gotten out of town, as soon as they could after it as well.
Unbelievable. Like you said, it was hosting the 23 class, the junior day that brought Arch Manning, Reuben Owens, Jonte Cook, just a ton of top level talent during the junior day. Were you able to get down to Austin for the junior day specifically?
Yeah, I was out there. It was a very hot day. That was the only weekend we went down there. And a big reason for that is there's only so much we can do on a visit weekend. We're not allowed to talk to official visitors when they're on campus. So on weekends that were really official visit heavy, I think that for us, it just wasn't really worth the investment to go down there and spend time. And that weekend, though, with the juniors, we did go down, take pictures, talk to a bunch of kids and things like that. And it's tough right now. It's been different in the past because, before all the construction to DKR, they would run everybody in through Moncrief, and we could pretty much sit out across the street from Moncrief, and everybody would go in and out through there. Now, everybody comes in through the north end zone, and they kind of send them out in different ways. So it's harder to sit on those things and be there to cover it, right? So, we were there. I mean, it was definitely a good day, a strong day there, and I think bolstered by the regional performance that night by the baseball team.
Absolutely. That me and Clint talked about that a little bit too. Is you were one of the few teams that still had a stadium full of fans. Whether, like you said, I think it was the regional weekend that they were playing. That you still had an audience, and I remember basketball had Arterio Morris and Keontae George as well. Attending the baseball games. But yeah, you had a fan atmosphere. You still had students on campus, and could give them that piece. What's it like to be verified on Twitter? How's that process?
I don't know.
Congratulations.
It happened this morning, so I'm still learning. I don't know that it makes that much of a difference. The only thing is I'm looking at my Twitter right now, and there's like on your notifications tab, it says mentions, and now it says verified. So I could break it down if I want to only verified people who correspond with me, but that would be no fun because most of the people I talk to are the fans who are not verified. So, those are in the players and stuff. So I wouldn't see all of their interactions. It's cool, I guess. I mean, it's one of those things that probably feels cooler day one and then you just kind of forget about it. But I'd kind of put in for it a couple weeks ago through Twitter's new system. They had opened the books like the mafia again, and so I decided to go in on it.
Right. So is that one of those things, correct me if I'm wrong, but similar to name, image, likeness, I think you can have the potential to get paid per tweet once you're verified. Is that true?
I guess it all depends on like what you would advertise. Now they're going to start this tip jar thing, and I'll tell you this: if I might start giving away some free. No, I'm just kidding. I was going to say I might start giving away some free scoop if that tip jar gets filled. But I did joke with some We were joking with I was joking with Matt Stepp, who does a great job covering high school football for Dave Campbell's, that every retweet we tweet of a coach looking for new assistants, we were going to need something in the tip jar to kind of push for us. So maybe everything I tweet with maybe every offer I get tagged in, I'll need a tip jar drop.
I was going to ask you that. How many times does your DM on Twitter get lit up with folks asking you specifically for nuggets that you don't put on the message board there at 247?
It used to be a lot more, and I think a lot of those people have found out that it always, the audacity of it kind of catches me off guard every time. I'm just like, why would I tell you? I mean, if I'm holding a secret for a kid or something like that, enough that I'm not going to tell the people who pay my salary, why would I tell you, random internet user? So it hasn't happened in a long time. I think I kind of was pretty stern with the guys who did reach out at first, but it hasn't happened in a while.
Because they got to understand, in my mind, that those relationships that you build with those players and those coaches have to last 2 or 3 years at this point, because kids get offered their sophomore, junior, senior year, and you create a relationship with them. And to give out information on a player would sabotage that relationship, I would think.
Not only that, but I mean, say get a school that produces a fair amount of talent, I don't just have to worry about him. I've got to worry about all the kids who come after him and dealing with that school, my relationship with that program. And just in general, like, I don't like to be that way. Obviously they've trusted me for a reason. I don't like to betray somebody's trust that way.
Absolutely. So what do you think? Last couple of commitments, Anthony Jones, I feel he could play just about all over the field in PK's system out of Las Vegas. What are your thoughts on him?
He's a guy that I think, he's rated a 3-star. I think he's like an 87 on ours, which lists him as about a mid-3. I think what's interesting with him is he's kind of been looked at as an athlete because he plays tight end and defensive end. And he didn't get to play last year because Clark County, Nevada didn't ever end up having a season. So, his ranking probably has the one of the bigger chances to rise in the class, because our guys out that way tell me they've loved what they've seen from him this spring, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So now that he's kind of defined for Texas as a defensive player, I think his ranking really could rise. He's a guy that, if you look at what PK did at Washington, took NFL bodies like that with athleticism and turned them into NFL players, productive pass rushers. I think convincing that kid, because I had heard that, offense was really where he had wanted to go, convincing him not only, he convinced him at Washington to commit to him to play defensive end. And then once again, when schools like Miami were pitching him tight end, convinced him to come in and play defense at Texas. And so, I think that's a great job by the staff that they did. And I think he's the type of big athletic body that you need to rush the passer.
Because we talked about Danny Shelton. We talked about Qualls on those Washington fronts and their ability to slide them in and out. In that 1 gap, 3 gap, 5 gap, outside of that wide 9, and sometimes even drop them in and then zone blitz them. That just the kind of athletes that he had. What about Jamarion Miller out of Tyler Legacy?
I think that it's one of the more remarkable stories I've covered, because I can tell you, what we tell you. And when I say, look, they were having a really hard time getting footing with Jamarion Miller, I can't tell you like how dire it was. People were telling me like, they aren't going to get this kid on campus for a visit. He doesn't want anything to do with Texas right now. And I don't really know the full reason why, and I haven't talked to Jamarion about it. And, a lot of it, I think, had to do with maybe the situation that happened with his brother, who was previously signed to Texas, and then, his grades fell through and he didn't get to enroll. And, despite that not really being Texas' fault, I think that some of that was hard for Jamarion. And a lot of it had to do with the way Tom Herman's staff recruited him. They were kind of in and out on Jamarion. They were never fully committed. And when this new staff came in, they were all in on him. So, once they made the connection, were able to get him on campus, it was like I wrote that day, I think they got a great chance of getting him once they get him on campus, because from what I was told, it was Jamarion was really stressing over the process, and somebody in his family told him, forget about the coaches, forget about, all these things. What school do you want to go to? And he said Texas, and they told him, well, then you should go take a visit at least. And so once they got him on campus, it was about the easiest thing ever. I could tell from talking to people that weekend, it was going to be quick. And I was actually standing in line in my hotel in Vegas to check in when I got a text that was like, all right, write the story. It's done. And so as far as what he brings to the table, there are people out there who will tell you he's every bit as good as Jaden Blue. I'd probably have Jaden Blue ranked slightly higher, but it wouldn't be a huge jump. The thing that really sticks out to me about both Jaden Blue and Jamarion Miller is they're both two of the most productive running backs in the country, over the last couple of years. Not only that, but they're doing it at the Texas 6A level, which if you want to, people can argue and they can argue all they want. I'll make a strong case. It's the best level of football in the country. And not to mention they both have verified athleticism that shows sub 1100 speed. Both of those guys are 10,700 guys. So they're home run threats. They can catch the ball. They can run through tackles. They can do it all. And so for Texas to get easily the top two backs in the state of Texas, and I would make an argument, two of the top 5 or 10 backs in the country, is about as good as you can expect, especially when you go back and look at what happened the week before with DeAnthony Gatson, where Texas felt they had a commitment from him, only for him to go to USC. And then all of a sudden, through whatever happened, they were able to get Miller on campus and close that deal. I think if the way they were feeling one day when Gatson commits to USC versus the way they're feeling this week, having Miller and Blue in the backfield, I think is just tremendous.
And I think it goes back to talking about Miller specific, and then we'll go back to a comment I've read this week and get your opinion on it as well, is when you have more than 60 kids on campus and you've offered 160 scholarships, there's probably, and we've talked about this before, Mike, is there's only 25 to 30 per class. You're not going to get everybody that comes to see you, and you're not going to get everybody that you offer. And sometimes, like you say, and I think this comes, and I'll comment about what I read too at the same time, is you got, like you said, the two best backs in the state. Who's going to come block for them? And I think everybody thinks that every offer is supposed to come to the university, but sometimes when those guys don't choose to come here, if you just wait a little longer, you may find that you get a better guy or a better quality player in the long term. Just my thoughts.
So we're kind of dancing around the Cam Williams commitment that happened tonight there. And so I'll just address it like this. Should Texas be losing 3-star offensive linemen to Oregon? No. But to discount the fact that Oregon, which has recruited at one of the highest levels on the offensive line in the country, cannot go win a recruitment. I mean, blowing them off as if they're Oregon, it's kind of crazy to me. I mean, that is kind of an offensive lineman's dream. Mario Cristobal, the head coach, is an offensive line guy. Their offensive line coach is one of the best in the country. So writing them off is crazy to me. It's one guy. And I think that when you get to it, the thing that bothers me, right, is Connor Robertson is making a decision tomorrow. My crystal ball is on Texas, has been for a long time, right? So people on our board will say, oh, great, it's just a 3-star guy. I don't think you get to have it both ways. You don't get to be upset that a 3-star guy didn't pick you and then be upset that, oh, you're only going to get a 3-star guy on a commitment. Either way, I mean, look at the players for what they are in each of their value. So, yeah, again, you're going to offer more. If you go back to Mack Brown, there's two distinct eras of Mack Brown's recruiting for me. There is the era where they were winning everything and they could literally get whoever they wanted. So, yes, offers were thrown out and basically accepted on the spot. And there were the latter years where Mack Brown decided, I'm going to offer the kids I know I can get and just make recruiting easier, even if they aren't as good. And so, yeah, people were used to Texas offering 35 kids and signing 25 of them, or things of that nature. Mac Brown used to always champion that at his press conference. We did 30 official visits and we signed 25 of them. I think that those are no longer the days. And if you were the person under Tom Herman who said, I wish we offered more kids, I wish we got into the game sooner for these people, this is what they're doing. So now there's more offers. There's more chances for those kids to not pick Texas. There's also more chances for kids to pick Texas. So, I mean, it's a numbers game. If you're increasing the number, you're going to increase wins, but you're also going to increase losses.
Gentlemen, can y'all hear me now? Can y'all hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, so my thoughts were like, and me and Clint talked about it, no stone unturned, coast to coast. That's what this coaching staff is doing, and you got to love it, because you never know if a kid will tell you yes unless you ask the question. And then, like you said, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, oh, I don't want a 3-star to add to my books. I don't want a place kicker. I don't want a long snapper to add to my books to drive my recruiting value down. And at the same time, want, like you're saying, to not, like you said, to discount Oregon and other schools to get picked over for a 3-star offensive lineman from Dallas. And like you said, you just can't have it both ways, in my opinion.
And real quick, because I think I came at the right time, because me and Jeremy actually talked about this, Mike, before the show. And it's, obviously we're on 247 and we're looking at these recruiting boards and we're like, goodness gracious, things are on fire. Mike Roach done shut down the board. But it goes back to everybody looking at those rankings, right? Where does Texas sit in the rankings? Currently at 5. But I think like you're talking about, when you're taking a 3-star guy that we want, all of a sudden it made the recruiting ranking go down, the actual average go down. You know what I'm saying? But then they're upset on the other end when we don't get the guys that obviously the coaching staff wants, but then they go to a program like Oregon. I think it's just a catch-22 in your job, Mike. And I probably missed quite a bit of what y'all talked about, but I think Jeremy probably told you that me or him couldn't do it, because you're going on a limb with a 17, 18-year-old, student athlete that has opportunities to go to multiple universities. And I was telling Jeremy that I have a 17-year-old and she can't figure out what she wants to eat every couple of minutes. You know what I'm saying? So them have this many opportunities to go to this many schools, and now visits opening up. I think it's just a catch-20, really a catch-22. If you put a crystal ball in and you go wrong, Mike Roach, you're wrong. But at the same time, if you don't put one in, you didn't have the insight on it. So just my thoughts on that.
Absolutely. And, like we'll talk. I think I said this on the board, but it tends to, anything I report positive gets extrapolated out to that's going to search, like that means it's a done deal. And it's just, I'm literally reporting what I'm hearing. So if it's like, hey, I talked to somebody who thinks, hey, we have a shot in this recruit. Like, let's take Justice Finkley, for example, who visited last week. I talked to a source there who said, we feel really good about the visit. We think we killed it with the parents. We think we're in this recruitment now. That means they're in the recruitment. Does not mean they have won the recruitment or will win the recruitment. But a lot of times that gets extrapolated out to, oh, it's a deal. Like with Terrence Brooks, I talked to some people the other day before Terrence Brooks committed. One person very close to Brooks told me they didn't think Ohio State would be a factor because they offered 2 weeks ago. And then, talking to Arch guys at Ohio State, they had kind of no clue that morning that anything was happening. So it all kind of came together quickly. All I did was say on his decision day, here's where I think things stand based on what I know. And what I know is that it's kind of been a Texas and Alabama race. It would surprise me if Ohio State came in, but, they came in, so it surprised me. And all I said was somebody at Texas that said they felt confident with the pitch they gave him, that they gave him a lot to think about. I never said he's going to pick Texas. I didn't even put a pick in because I had no clue where he was going. And sometimes that's the case. There's times where guys will ask us for edits and stories and all sorts of things. We've shot videos for kids that they haven't used and committed somewhere else. I mean, if you shoot a video for a kid, that's about as much confirmation as you would think you would need, right, to say that this kid's going there, only to see the kid throw the video in the trash and use something else and go somewhere else. I mean, kids are trying to figure out how to fool people like me more and more. So it's part of the territory for sure. I have a really cool job. and there's some downsides to it. And this is one of the downsides is, nights like this. And what I'll probably do is when I'm done here, just let the board burn on its own and it'll burn out, and we'll go on with tomorrow. I've kind of said my piece, and I'm not going to keep arguing with a wall about it. So I just think, like I said today on a thread, I came into this week thinking that Texas had a serious chance to land 4 guys. Those guys were Jamarion Miller, Cam Williams, Cole Hudson, and Connor Robertson. I'm 1-1 right now, and by tomorrow at this time I could be 3-1.
Mike, going back to this whole 0-2 or 1-1 and so on and so forth, it was funny because I actually put a comment on I think one of our videos that we did just recently, because somebody says, we wind up being 0-2, but at the same time, how many other guys that committed did you beat for these schools? You know what I'm saying? It's not like everybody that committed to your school is not being looked at by somebody else. So you actually went head to head with those other schools, and I think people take away from it because what's happened in June is that you've had, 100 visitors that have visited the state, the University of Texas with 23s and 22 guys. And all that build up to get to July to these commitment dates has really started a whirlwind tour, and if you start off July, like everybody's looking now, you've lost it really going back. And I think I said this on our live last night that I looked at it, we probably had a 25% chance of grabbing, cornerback that went to Ohio State. You know what I'm saying? To me, he wasn't in the cards. Cam Williams was really an afterthought based on some of these other linemen that we currently have and we're looking at. But I'm foolish to think that these coaching staff don't want these guys. It's just they decided to pick someone else. I don't know what questions so far from the board, which ones we got into, which ones we haven't got into.
Not a one.
And I apologize for that.
Here's another point I'll make on that, and then we can probably just move on and go because we're beating a dead horse probably here. But it's all about timing too, right? So let's pretend, okay, it's tomorrow, and hypothetically Cole Hudson and Connor Robertson have picked Texas along with Jamarion Miller. What if instead of Terrence Brooks, his announcement date, that was Cole Hudson's announcement date? And what if instead of Cam Williams, it was Connor Robertson's announcement date? And Texas starts the week 3-0. How much, does that change perception on everything? A lot of it's timing. A lot of it right now, it feels like it sucks. And then if they win tomorrow, it'll feel better. That's just kind of the way it goes.
Yeah.
So I got a really good question. For you, Mike. It's really, really good one. So it's from one of our guys on the board, Cody Phillips. And he's asking if you could put together a methodology of recruiting 101, what would your syllabus and outline look like?
I guess recruiting 101 in the sense of how I'm teaching the average fan of what recruiting is, or if probably, it would be crafting the strategy.
I would say strategy. What would be your strategy?
Okay, so I think what you have to start with is relationships, because that's where recruiting is based. Like you've got to, a lot of it is work. It's a lot of putting in the work and making, you may want to go home at night and see your wife, but you may need to make that extra phone call or do that extra FaceTime or whatever the case may be. A lot of times it comes down to consistency in contact. And so that would be relationship building, and consistent contact would be my first one. If I was orchestrating it, I would probably have a social media criteria for my staff that they would need to hit a certain quota of posts. They need to be different in some way. Retweets don't count. You've got to be out there and be visible. And then really from there, it's just kind of about selling what your strong points are. I think if you're in sales, right? Like I think it's the old Don Draper line from Mad Men. If they don't like what you're saying, change the conversation. Talk about the things that really set your program apart from every other. And so I think I talked to somebody at Texas who told me, I don't really sell Texas because it sells itself. Austin is great. We've got, all these businesses, we play big time football, these things. He goes, I sell relationships, and that's what we're into. So I think for me, that would be the crux of it. I hope that kind of answers your question.
So the next one is going to be it's going to be player related. How would you compare Denver Harris' game to Derek Stingley's coming out of high school? Both have the same measurables, and I feel Harris has the potential to be the next Stingley. Is that pretty close?
Yeah, man, I love Harris. I do. I really do. Derek Stingley is on the Mount Rushmore of best football players I've ever seen in my life. Like he's just kind of on a level of his own. Derek Stingley did some very, very freakish and uncommon things that I haven't seen a lot of other guys do at that level. I've seen him in a bunch of different settings. I watched him since he was a sophomore and know some people very close to him. So I've talked to him about things and man, yeah, I agree that like the build is there. You know, if Harris comes back strong off that knee injury, I know he can run that way and all those sorts of things. I would say he's comparable in a lot of ways, but to me, you know, when we're talking about the best football players I've ever seen in my life, Derek Stingley is top 4 or 5 for me. So I would need to see a little bit more from Denver to kind of put him in that category. That's no shame. I mean, you can certainly be a 5-star, but I thought the year he came out, Derek Stingley was the number 1 player in the country.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Then I'm going to hop in here real quick.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so one of the topics that me and Mike talked about was Jamarion Miller. And Mike said he believes that Texas has the 2 best backs in the state this year coming to the university. And Jeff has a comment. He says, it says something about Miller coming, knowing that Jaden Blue is already committed to this class. When you're dealing with recruits, Mike, how much, in your experience, how much as you get later on the recruiting cycle, does it matter to kids if another top-level talent has already recruited?
It depends on the position. So obviously at quarterback, it's a sensitive subject. If you try to bring in 2 quarterbacks, you have to do it very delicately. At running back, it's kind of become the norm to want to take 2 high-level guys, and guys are more and more cognizant of keeping that wear and tear off their body with dreams of going to the NFL. I think they've seen it work at several schools, including like Alabama, and seeing, you know, what Steve Sarkisian's done with that talent. So, and the thing that's unique about Jamarion Miller is he already plays in a 2-back system at Tyler. The other running back at Tyler Legacy, Bryson Donnell, just committed to Texas Tech. So he's also a Power 5 level player who would be a star anywhere else he was at, but they split carries there. So, you know, I actually asked him that today when I saw him, and he was just like, I already do that. And he goes, man, you know, Jaden Blue's really good. And he goes, I think I'm really good. So that's quite a combo we would bring.
That's awesome. What effect do you think the NIL is going to have on recruiting moving forward as far as big programs with big money donors?
I think a lot of it depends on what we see shake out in the first year. I don't think anybody really knows, right? Like it's gone from we can use it as this big tool to now if you listen to coaches, they're saying, well, only 2 or 3 guys are going to get paid off this really seriously. So, you know, anybody could sell anything to anybody. So it'll depend on the way schools pitch it. I mean, I think in the short term, it'll probably have a bigger effect than the long term. In long term, everything's going to even out, I think, and kids will figure it out. And I think what kids are starting to figure out is it's not going to matter what your NIL setup is if you don't play. And so, and you don't win and you don't go win championships. So even like Evan Stewart, who is probably the most business savvy kid I've ever met, is a megastar on TikTok, all those types of things, told me like, it doesn't matter what the NIL does if I can't be on the field making plays. Like no one's going to care about me if I'm not taking care of business on the field. So, you know, I think it's just really going to depend on how things play out.
I just took a note. Yeah, I just took a note about Cam Williams because something I said last night on our live was getting back into DeSoto, Cedar Hill, Duncanville, Mansfield, Arlington. I mean, it looks like Martin is a place that sends athletes to Texas. But when are we going to get back into that South Dallas area for recruits? Is that something you see?
Yeah, Martin's kind of become a little bit of a pipeline. You know, hopefully Texas plants a flag at Bowie this year with Devon Campbell. That would be a huge win for them. And, you know, I think they've got the right pieces in place to do that. I think that Campbell really loves Kyle Flood. Joseph Sam, who's the head coach at Bowie, is basically his mentor was Chris Gilbert. So, they've got all the right people in all the right places in that recruitment. They've just got to kind of come through and finish it off. If you look at Duncanville's been tough since Rashad Samples left. It's just been one weird recruitment after another. I think you just got to keep swinging. That's too talented of a program to totally abandon. DeSoto, Texas is very much in line. In fact, I would probably call him the early leader for Jonte Cook at this point. South Oak Cliff, I think you'll see a lot more influence there with Chris Gilbert, who's a former SOC player and head coach. I think you'll see a lot more attacking there. And, they've already made a good impression early with Javon Thomas, who's at SOC, and a couple of other guys who came down for the visit. So I think it'll happen. I think that it's already better than it was. I can say that. This time last year, they didn't have a prayer landing anybody from any of those schools, really. So, outside of Byron Murphy. But I think it'll happen over the next year or so, more so than anything. Tom Herman benefited from the head coach bump, and sold kind of the new fresh deal, and that helped him. I don't think you get away with that twice. And so selling the new fresh look is tough. It's tougher for Steve Sarkisian than it was for Tom Herman. They've got to win. That's the case. They've got to produce on the field and remove those negative recruiting points.
Yeah, I was listening to something the other day, and I didn't realize that Texas hadn't gone 3-0 in some time to start the season. And I think that's what has to happen to build that momentum in recruiting going forward. Obviously, October, the first weekend in October is going to be big against Oklahoma. Let's talk about obviously the school out east with Texas A&M. Where do you see the battles with Texas and Texas A&M when it comes to Harris and the Banks and in the Houston area? Is Jimbo Fisher selling something there? Obviously, they finished number 4 in the nation last year. Is he selling something people are buying, which is affecting what's happening in Texas right now?
Yeah, Jimbo Fisher is one heck of a recruiter. He's always been that way. He's always had that reputation. So, when he gets personally involved for a kid like Bryce Anderson, it's going to matter. Now, I think Texas had a lot of the momentum through the spring for Bryce Anderson, but the longer that played out, the worse it was for Texas. And I think I've been yelling that since April. Like, you need to lock this down now, or else it could get hairy. And it's starting to get a little hairy. And I think that, for Texas, they feel like they're doing everything they can in that race. But again, just like I talked about, I know Texas fans would like to believe that A&M has nothing going for it, but that's just not the case. They've got a coaching staff that recruits well. They've got a head coach that recruits well. They've got some of the best football facilities in the country. They've got a bowl in their New Year's Six bowl in their back pocket, and a top 5 finish last year. For offensive linemen, they can sell the fact that their offensive line was pretty dominant last year. They've got a lot of things going for them. And so I think people tend to look at it as what is Texas doing wrong? And they never credit what are the other teams doing right, to do this. So I think both those races are going to be razor sharp. The thing that fascinates me is with Kelvin Banks. I have never really encountered a recruitment like this where both sides are so positive. Both sides feel they are the runaway leader for Kelvin Banks. And that's usually a weird sign, because usually you can start to feel the wind blow in one direction or another. And talking to 3 or 4 people at A&M, it's, hey man, we don't think there's anybody close to us. In Texas, it's the same message. So that one is really interesting to me. I've never quite felt it was the slam dunk others may have made it out to be, even during the spring. I think if it were up to his parents, it would probably be Texas. But I think that one's going to really play out over the next month in a very interesting way. It's probably going to be the bloodiest battle out there on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, I go over to their board as well, just to get some insider information. It's you can't tell the C's haven't parted either one way or the other. You had something you want to add, Jeremy?
Not really add. Great insight though, because I've talked about Bryce Anderson and his versatility in the defensive backfield. Now I think he can play slot, boundary, safety. Beaumont Westbrook uses him in a lot of different ways. And then Kelvin Banks is also one of my top 5 can't miss that I think will really make an impact if you're able to get him on finally committed and then signed. But someone's asking about the defensive line, and there was a lot of out-of-state defensive linemen that recently visited. Justice Finkley, you mentioned earlier, the kid Miles. How's the defensive line looking as you currently see it?
Well, they've got 3 commits already with Christopher Ross, Zach Swanson, and Anthony Jones. Anthony Jones technically a backer, but he's an edge guy. I would lump him into that defensive line group. And I think they're going to be a little choosy. I think that I'll just say I don't think KJ Miles is going to pick Texas this weekend, and I think that that's probably because they encouraged him not to. I don't know that for sure, but I think that they're going to really look at their options and make sure that they don't fill up somewhere. It's really they're still in it for Jure Bledsoe, who has some academic things to figure out. But if he does, he's a heck of a talent. And I think that Bo Davis has done a really good job with him. Like I said, I think that they think they're very much in the picture for Justice Finkley now after that visit. So there are a lot of irons in the fire. I think it's just about kind of figuring out where things stand with those guys and making sure you maximize your numbers, especially in a class where you're taking a kicker and a long snapper. You really got to maximize your numbers because you're using 2 spots on non-traditional positions.
And I think we're there now, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll get your take on it too, with the current numbers that we have already committed to the class. I think you're now having to be more selective. Like we talked about 160 offers, 60 total visits or more. But I think at this point, you got to be honing in on those guys that you feel can make your football team better, can make your roster better, and going specifically after those guys. Is that your thought?
Yeah, it's a numbers game from there on out, and you're probably going to miss some things. You're probably going to think it's a gamble. It's hitting on 17, in blackjack. It's, we think we're going to take a chance by passing on one guy because we feel good enough about another guy that we may not definitely get, but we're going to take a shot at it. So yeah, that's kind of recruiting at its highest levels.
So kind of while we're on this roster thing, with the opportunity to bring in guys from the transfer portal to fill spots, which Texas did this quite a bit this year to fill that linebacker position, and I think the defensive line. What effect do you think that has going in as far as in the future, as far as the numbers that teams are going to take as far as high school recruits go?
It's definitely already in effect where schools are saving spots in their class for transfer portal guys. And I think that the key with that is we don't have to develop an 18-year-old, and we don't have to worry that an 18-year-old is going to come here and not be homesick and go to class and do all the things we want to do. I think if you can cherry pick from the transfer portal to fill holes in your class, you're going to do it every year. We've seen Oklahoma do it every year, even when you feel like they don't need it. Oklahoma's added 2 transfer portal running backs this year. Where you kind of feel like, okay, do they need that many guys? But if you can, I think it's all about turning over the bottom of that roster and making it's not necessarily making the top of your roster as good as it can be, making the bottom of your roster as good as it can be. If your 85th guy is better than your old 85th guy, then that makes your team better. So I think that it's going to be here to stay for sure. I think Texas is going to continue to be aggressive in the portal where they want to be. And I think it's going to be a new, interesting strategy that schools have to figure out how to operate with.
And I kind of equated this to the NFL last show we did last night. Is I kind of look at the transfer portal as free agency, and I look at your recruiting classes is basically your draft picks, and just as you defined it. So you're building your best, as you described at 85, but we talked about last night. You're 2 deep, you're 44, and those 55 guys or 60 guys that play on a Saturday, like I'm trying to get the 5th or 6th best linebacker. And if I don't have what I feel is championship quality, then I go looking for, like you said, experience through the transfer portal.
I think you can point to like Devin Richardson as a great example of that. Texas felt they needed some beef inside. They could go with a guy late in the recruiting class and take a chance. They could have gone JUCO, or they could go with a guy that, yeah, he did it at New Mexico State, but he had 100 tackles. And so he was productive. He had ties to Texas. He kind of had everything they were looking for. So even if Devin Richardson isn't a starter this year, if he's better than your second inside linebacker you had on the roster, you're making your team better, little by little.
All right.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna go back to the board real quick for some questions. So Nathan Pena, I heard there are players that were graded evenly, and coaches were likely waiting to see who looked the part or better in person. Did anyone benefit from their visits and get themselves prioritized?
I think for the most part, I could probably talk more about guys who did not benefit from their visits than the ones who did. There were a few that probably, once they were there in person, the staff changed on them. Trying to think. Only a few of them did private workouts, so it's hard to say anybody really, separated themselves in that way. I think there's nobody that sticks out to me for sure that came in on a visit. We really didn't know what it was, what we thought about him. I guess really the only one I could point to is DeAnthony Gadsden, who picked USC. So he was a guy that I think they wanted to see in person. They thought they felt good enough to take him. And then he ended up committing elsewhere. So that's probably the guy I'd point to.
Okay. Next question here, really quick. So Alabama comes on late in recruiting. Has the culture influenced the way? Has that culture influenced the way that Sark recruits as a head coach?
No, I think Sark would like to be further along than he is. I think if you asked him, would you like to have Evan Stewart and Kelvin Banks and all these guys right now? I think he would tell you yes, but that the reality of the situation is what it is. And, Texas is not in that position right now. So I think it's more, I think if Sark's, just from listening to him talk about recruiting in several settings, I think kind of his perfect class would probably, he'd like to have 15 or 16 guys by the end of the summer. He'd like to close on 5 or 6 guys in the fall, hold a spot or two open for maybe a late developer that they could offer in the fall, and then hold a couple spots for the portal. That's probably what a class would look like if I think Sark could have it his perfect way.
I'm going to do something for the channel real quick, Mike, if you don't mind. Scott Sheridan, when we first popped on, gave us a $20 super chat for the show. So definitely want to thank him for his donation to the show. We really appreciate that.
Shout out,
there's
Scott.
115. Yeah, thank you. There's 115 viewers in here. We only got 36 likes. So if you'd hit that like button, we'd really appreciate it. And then I want to ask you about a specific athlete in the 2022 class, Malik Murphy. So I was reading an article last night on 24/7 that talks about his performance in the Elite 11, and that after day one, he was ranked number 2. Guys, please go over to Mike's 247 page. Check that out. Where do you see Malik finishing? What your intel tells you, finishing the Elite 11 camp? I think he's got a good shot to win it, be the MVP, in my opinion. And then where do you see his final ranking being when this season ends?
So you got Nick's out there covering. Nick Harris, who works with us, is out there covering Elite 11 right now and doing a great job. He's the guy y'all really wanted on. I was just the guy who was around, So y'all got stuck with me because Nick's in California. I talked to Nick and a couple guys on our team. Look, I know a lot of people. Malik Murphy's a really polarizing individual for a lot of people because they either hate him or love him. And to me, I'm a big fan. I've always been a very vocal fan of Malik Murphy because I think the tools are just so tremendous. And it's hard to look at a skill set like he has and say, I understand why college coaches think I can develop this. I can make this into something, especially if you're Steve Sarkisian and you've done it. So I'm not surprised that he's ripping this camp because I've seen him in many settings just throw the hell out of the ball. And most impressive arm, like just pure arm talent I've ever seen in a high school quarterback. Not to say that he's the most impressive quarterback, but for sure the most. He just makes throws that you can't imagine. He makes NFL throws regularly. And so I think for Malik, the biggest struggle right now is always going to be consistency. can he be consistent with everything and be consistently accurate, be consistently on time, repeat his delivery, all those sorts of things. I'm really interested. I got Nick supposed to call me as soon as he's done tonight and tell me how night 2 went for him, because this is the pro day. This is like the big separator for Elite 11. They love this. They script a pro day, and it's like 30 throws, and they score it like a 1-3 scoring range. So you could score, like the best you can score is like a 90 or something. And that's really what they go off a lot with the rankings. So interested to see how he does in that. A lot of it's just going to depend on how he does this season. He didn't have a great spring season. A lot of that is because it was a spring season shortened by COVID where they didn't get to practice, and his team's not very good around him. I mean, if any of you watch those streams, Malik had his fair share of mistakes. I'm not going to push all the blame off him. There were times he just didn't make the throws, but there were also times they couldn't protect him, that receivers couldn't get open. They couldn't catch the ball if they did get open. I watched one game of his. It just so happened that I was always traveling like when he was playing on a stream. So I only got to see his last game, and I was so frustrated for him. I called him after the game and was just like, dude, nobody could catch the ball on your team. Like, what's going on? And credit to him. He's not going to throw his teammates under the bus, but I think for him, it'll really see how it shakes out. We kind of want to see that progression. We know he's a great camp quarterback. We know he's a great 7-on-7 quarterback. We'd like to see the progression on the field. I think the tools, the ceiling, everything is so tremendous, but we got to see him start to put it together.
All things that we said. Yeah, if I can finish this one. All things that we've said, and I think that consistency that you talked about comes from the lack of, again, exactly what you said. The line doesn't give him the time that he needs to sit back there and go through progressions and make the right throw. Like you said, because I did watch 2 or 3 of his games there at Junipero Cerro. And when he does have time to make the throws, like you said, guys don't make plays for him. So Clint shot me a text after I shot him the link to the article last night. And he's like, man, could you imagine Malik playing on like a South Lake Carroll or Austin Westlake or a Civil Oak Steel or a DeSoto or something like that, and how if he got to play with those types of lines and those types of receivers, how great he could be. And that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe. Yeah, I'd love to see it. I really would. I'd love to see him with a strong supporting cast around him, so I could really have a good opinion on it. Because like I said, I do think there were a lot of times where it was his fault. I can't push all the blame off on his teammates. There were times he just didn't make the right throw or the right read or any of that. But I also wonder how much of that is credited to the fact that every time he takes a snap, he knows he's running for his life immediately. So we just want to see the progression, man. I always tell people Malik is not raw. People always call him raw. He's inexperienced. Mechanically, he's about as he's a little more fine-tuned than most high school quarterbacks that you find. He's just inexperienced. That's kind of how everything is with him.
Biggest mover, non-committed, committed offer, or really offer, non-committed offer, committed in the class right now. Biggest mover in the rankings by the end of the year. Who do you think it's going to be?
Who is not committed in the class?
Not committed or committed or not.
Either way.
Either one.
Either way. Huh. That's a good question. I would say I think Chris Ross has a chance to really rise this year. We loved what we saw on the track from him. He threw the heck out of the shot put. His film is great. If you look at his frame's super projectable. Mm-hmm. I think he's a guy that could really start to push his way up, especially with a really strong year. If he could kind of build on what he did last year, where he came out of nowhere a little bit. I think that's a guy that could really rise. Another guy I love, he's got a Texas offer. I mentioned him on the mic at night tonight as like another cornerback option. I've been a Xavier Bryce fan from Arlington Seguin forever. The problem is that I've thought he was a corner forever, and he's thought he's a receiver forever, and he's kind of now like leaning towards playing corner. I think if you look, if I recall correctly, at the SMU camp, he came in at 6'1", 170 and ran 4.49. So I mean, he's big, he can run, he's long. I love the total package. I think he's a guy that could really rise.
Savion Bryce. I've seen him, man, long legged guy. It's funny because you talked about that because me and Jeremy, when we went to that 7-on-7 there in Dallas, it's funny because we were talking to a couple of DeSoto football players, and me and Jeremy were talking to one of them. He's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna be a safety," or he's like, "I want to be a cornerback, but he looks like a safety. I want to be a cornerback, but he looks like a safety." How often do you run into that with these? With a lot of these kids, where they probably should play one position, but they're adamant about playing another position. Does that play a part into their recruitment as well?
All the time. There's so many kids that I just want to shake and be like, I wish you could see the big picture here. There's so many kids that they could be an All-American safety, but they want to play corner or wide receiver. They could be an All-American defensive end, but they want to play basketball. They're 6'3" or 6'4". They want to play center in basketball. There's so many kids who could be All-American NFL picks at linebacker, but they think they're defensive back, and they just don't see the vision. And we can often see it because it's easy. I mean, it's easy to see it from outside. I think it's harder when you have the view of yourself as something to change that view of yourself. There are kids who've successfully done it, and I know that I can point to a couple of success stories. Deshaun White, who plays middle linebacker at Oklahoma, was a safety when I met him. He was a 6'1.5", 215-pound safety as a sophomore in high school, and I was like, dude, you're a linebacker. And he fought it at first, but when we finally got it through to him, I said, you got to start going to camps as a linebacker. He took off. He got Oklahoma, Texas A&M, all those schools offered him. And I told him, I was like, you're the perfect type of linebacker to play in the Big 12. You are a guy who has the foot speed and the experience at safety, but you have the size of a linebacker, and you will make a lot of money. And I think he saw it back in high school, but I think he really saw it playing behind Kenneth Murray at Oklahoma, and then seeing, what Kenneth Murray, who kind of profiled the same way, grew into it and was drafted high. So kudos to the guys who see it. There are guys who are too stubborn. I can remember a story like that off the top of my head of a kid who we told all along he played receiver and he played outside linebacker. And I told him, you're a pass rusher. Stop trying to play receiver. You're a middle of the road receiver. And I said, you're a potentially great pass rusher. And he went to a small college to go play receiver and bounced out of there before he ever got to play. So, I think that more than not, kids have a view of themselves that's probably not realistic. There are a lot of guys who are 6'5", 250 in high school that think they're going to be edge rushers, and they just don't understand science and the way that they're going to add 50 pounds in no time and be playing at 300 and be playing inside. And so, we try to kind of push it as well as we can to them, but in the end, that's their decision. And yeah, I do think there are kids who absolutely refuse to be recruited at positions like in that case, the defensive end. They refuse to be like, well, I'm a 4-eye. And so that stops schools from recruiting them, because in the end, if a kid doesn't want to play a position, he's not going to play the position. You're not going to get him to do it. So I think it's something we see happen all the time.
And I'll give you an example of, I think, and you'll have to tell me if this guy was an easy transfer or move, was Marvin Overshow. When I saw him the first time coming out of ARP, he was 6'4", 215 pounds in the Under Arbor All-American game. And he was coming in with the likes of Caden Stearns and BJ Foster. And I was like, Clint, you add 20 pounds to this guy and you drop him down, and he's going to be one heck of a linebacker in this conference. And I don't know if Tom Herman's staff ever approached him that when he was early in his career, but since he has been moved, it seems like that's a position that he's going to excel at and probably going to be drafted eventually, I think.
Yeah, we all knew he was going to be a linebacker, because if you just looked at him, you understood what he was going to develop into. And he didn't want to hear that at all. And in fact, the Texas staff didn't want us to write that at all. In fact, there were members of the staff that would reach out and say, do not mention linebacker if you write about Jamarion Overshow. So they were just trying to get him to campus, knowing they were probably going to move him to linebacker quickly, but they didn't want us to mention it. So, I think that for him, when he got it, when it clicked in his head, it was like, okay, I can make a lot more money doing this than being, this project safety type who's got to backpedal and do all these things. If I could just run to the football and hit, that suits my skill set a lot more. I had the same conversation with Tyler Owens when he was in high school, because Tyler, to me, Tyler was dead set on playing safety. And I said, Tyler, think about it. You're 6'3", you're 205 pounds now. You've got a massive frame. You're going to hold 230, 240 easily. And you're one of the fastest players in the state of Texas. I said, if you put that in the box and just let you run and find the ball, and you don't have to backpedal and you don't have to do all the things and process everything in the secondary, you're going to be an NFL pick. It's almost just easy math to do so. So, Tyler was a kid that was resistant to change, and it sounds like he's less resistant now, but I think had he come in with the idea of maybe being a linebacker, things would have gone a little quicker for him.
Got a question here. 100-yard podcast. Mike, what is your honest opinion of the O-line class that Texas will gather this year?
I think it's going to be a good class. I think regardless of the fact that they lost Cam Williams today, I think I'm not saying – I have to put a qualifier here because everything I say gets turned into something different. I'm not saying that this is how it's going to happen, but it's not out of reach that Texas lands Cole Hudson, Connor Robertson, Devon Campbell, Kelvin Banks, and a fifth guy, whether that be Cam Dewberry, whether that be an out-of-state type of guy. And if you sign that class, I think that's about as good of a class as Texas has had in the last decade.
Absolutely. Right. And you're talking about because we talked about them having the two best backs in the state, what we feel like, and then you talk about Malik Murphy and his performance and what he brings to the table. And if you can get those five guys or a combination of 4 or 5 of those guys, then I think, because we could ask that all the time, can Texas finish with a top 5 class? I don't know at this point. Do you have thoughts on top 10, top 5 at the end of the year?
I think there's certainly top 10 potential. Top 5 is going to depend on how they play. I mean, it's just going to depend on how they play and how they close down the stretch, because that's where you get the top 5. When you get late in the game and Alabama's lined in this 5-star and flipping that guy, that's where the movement happens in the top 5. So, it's just going to depend on how they play and close down the stretch, but they certainly have the potential to. So, I mean, the guys they have on the board left that I think they're in favorable positions for are certainly enough to affect the points to put them in that range.
Good stuff, man. You got any last questions, Jeremy, before we let Mike Roach go?
No. We promised him an hour, and we're keeping him a little longer. Just one last thought, because he's in every show, and he's really takes time to ask us questions, and he sends, even in the comment section. But David Williams always gives us bright stuff, and he was like, why have some services reduced Jaden Blue's rankings so significantly? He was doing great during 7-on-7, but the decision not to play, it seems like it's hurt him. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think it has. I think some services, and I know our services had conversations about it. Frankly, the bottom line is if you don't play, you can't gain any ground and others gain ground around you. So it's hard for us to justify leaving a guy that way when he's not playing. Now, that said, and I don't know if I wrote this or not, I wouldn't be totally surprised if Jaden Blue played this fall. Let's just leave it at that. I think that things are changing in that area. I'll actually see him this weekend at Pylon 7-on-7 Nationals in Dallas. And I'll talk to him a little more there. But to me, it doesn't change who he is. Jaden Blue is still – there's narratives out there about him that I think are false, and I think they're made by people who don't know Jaden Blue. He's a kid I do know pretty well. I've known for a while. And so I think there are false narratives out there about him. And I think that when you look at his skill set, everything he's done at the high school level, his talent doesn't change because he doesn't play this year. I would prefer he plays. That's my preference, but it's also not my choice. So while I would hope he plays, I don't think it changes his ability by not playing. And I think if it keeps a couple miles off of his legs, and I've seen enough running backs run into the ground, I think it maybe even raises his ceiling a little bit. So not to say that Klein Kane does that, but I've seen it at other schools. I mean, Katy and Alito have a history with their guys for sure of running those guys hard in high school and those guys entering college with a lot of carries. So, I think that it's really the simple answer is if you can't play, we can't justify keeping you up there. All
right, one last question, because I'll get beat up by 22 Effect or Noah Ford or whoever it is that bumps our stuff on Twitter all the time. And I think you're aware who they may be, Mike. He's asking about the Robinson brothers. Do we see them getting an offer from Texas anytime soon?
Those guys are young. They don't have varsity film. It's going to take some time. I mean, if you're getting offered as a 24, you're the elite of the elite. And I like the Robinson brothers quite a bit. I need to see them live. I think I'll see them this weekend, actually. But it's just going to take some time. Both those guys are really good, but they got to put it together on the field and show production.
All right. If you want to plug 247 before we get off of here, Mike.
Yeah, Texas.247sports.com or Horns 24/7, however you want to find it. The State of Recruiting podcast, which has already been recorded today and will be released tomorrow. And then my Twitter is Mike Roach 247. You can find me on there. And that's where I am most of the time. So
hey,
that's all I got.
Hey, puts out really good work. Mike and Knight, the Stampede. The podcast is wonderful with him and Nick Harris. So if you're not catching that, definitely catch that. But hey, we appreciate you coming on here, Mike. Definitely appreciate you coming on here and giving us your insight into recruiting. I know it was a rough day today. I was watching the board catch on fire, calling Jeremy before we started this. I'm like, goodness gracious, just the day. But hey, same thing for us. You can find us on TX. You can find us on Twitter at TX Football Talk, on Facebook at TX Football Talk, and on Instagram at TX Football Talk. And don't forget, Mike Roach is now verified on Twitter. Hey, y'all have a wonderful night and hook 'em.
Hook 'em.
Hook 'em.